Hello guys, welcome back to Mitch. In this video I will be uploading videos mostly on Monday, so I will be posting them on video. If you want some scary videos now, I'm hoping to get some views on this. Subscribe.
Embarrassment. We're doing a fit. No. Oh, nope. Going high. Oh, you got a real sweaty palm there, buddy. Don't be afraid. Be terrified.
There is a channel on British television intended for the ages of 0 to 7 years old. It is called CBeebies. It delights in young children's shows, most of which are educational, teaching them to count and spell, plant flowers and vegetables, and even to cook. But there's one show that I have since delved into and looked behind the innocence of. A bedtime show that readies children for slumber. That one show is In the Night Garden. The show opens with a child left out to sea with a little light and a blanket for a sail. I had always found that rather odd, but nonetheless, the show seemed rather endearing. There's a sweet girl who appears among daisies, aptly named Upsy Daisy, a bluish-colored toddler who seems to be the main character, whose name is Iggle Piggle, and other fun characters such as tiny wooden dolls, called the Pontypines, and Wattingers, some triplets called the Tomblyboos, a rock-obsessed thing called Maka Paka, some inanimate inflatables called Hahoos, and modes of transportation that seem rather flatulent, a train of sorts called the Ninky Nonk, and a zeppelin called the Pinky Ponk. Also, some delightful but strange recolorings of birds called the Titty Fairs. You would have thought that these were just lovable imaginings by a child. But then again, you'd be so unfortunately correct. I cannot divulge how I know what I know. But here's the truth behind the garden in the night. A selfish couple who had born a son found themselves boozing and partaking in narcotics. This poor 3-year-old boy was left to watch his parents fall into stupor, leaving him vulnerable, lonely and unloved. The only time the little boy had any fun was when he was at nursery. There he would play with all his friends, and he couldn't wait to see his friend Daisy. He had grown quite fond of her, and they were the closest of friends. They always danced and played together, the boy usually tuckering himself out and falling asleep on his red little blankie. The other toddlers who attended were of a funny sort. There were 3 boys who were triplets. They seemed rather close, always in coordinated clothing, and tumbling all over the place. One boy would often ask to play outside. He loved to pick up stones and stack them in threes. He would often take them to the sink and use the sponges to clean them. The other toddlers thought it odd, but the stone-obsessed child liked to offer a shiny pebble or rock as a token of his friendship, and the others gladly accepted this. Within the nursery there were quite an array of toys. The little boy's favorite were the train set and the radio-controlled zeppelin that was made of aluminum and helium. Much like those floating sharks, it would stay afloat near the ceiling, its unusual colors highlighted by the light through the window. Among the other toys were some large fun inflatables that the children often liked to jump and bounce on, a little doll's house with neighboring dolls, and a colorful bouncy ball, among various others. Outside in the far corner of the nursery garden was a small aviary with various colored birds. The little boy would often delight in hearing the birds sing throughout his time there. At the nursery is where he would find his escape, where the nursery workers would care for him, and a local elderly man would come in to read stories for them, those of which he was very fond of. That old man would give funny names to the dolls and paid special attention to the little boy with the blanket. He made him feel safe. But unfortunately for him, this little boy would soon have to face the cold hard reality of his cold and unloving home. That day, his father would come to pick him up, but he would never see the dark and gloomy interiors of his room again. Sitting quietly in the dingy and cigarette end-filled car, the little boy would always stay quiet, peering out the window. The drive, he realized, was taking longer than it should. Looking out of the window, he found himself in unfamiliar landscapes. He looked at his father in the reflection of the rearview mirror, catching his eye and a furrowed brow. The young boy stayed quiet and held onto his blanket tightly. Having fallen into a slumber, the confused and scared toddler could see that the sky had turned to dusk, the stars glinting in the night sky as the sun had just set. His father had rolled down a window. A roaring of the sea could be heard close by, a distinct smell of sea air. He had never been to the beach before, but why so late? The father pulled up onto the beach, parking at the far end behind a dune, keeping the car out of sight. Getting out of the car, he opened the door for the little boy. Dazed and confused, he stepped out onto the sand. "Why at beach, Daddy?" the little boy said, trembling, confused and cold as his arms were exposed to the cold night air through his short sleeves. The father said nothing and picked the little boy up, the boy clinging onto his blanket, crying and wailing as his father tightened his grip, applying his hand to his mouth as to silence him. The little boy struggled before giving in, crying silently as his unloving father wrapped him up in his blanket. The little boy thought maybe for a second he was just trying to warm him up so he could take him on a strange night walk across the shore. His father remained quiet, body outnumbered. He pulled out a torch and shone it around the beach, as if he were looking for something that he knew was there. He had found what he was looking for, and the boy had gotten quite tired from the ordeal, his head bobbing in and out of consciousness on his father's shoulders. Without a second thought, the man led the boy to an old wooden boat. By this time, the boy was drifting, opening his eyes in confusion, but too tired and cold to retaliate. The man pushed the boat to the shore and began waddling out into the sea. The tide was strong, and as he went for one last push, he dropped his torch into the boat before his son began to drift out to the horizon, leaving him to the fate of the ocean. His parents had finally abandoned him in the cruelest way imaginable. The boy's eyes began to flutter. He saw a glimmer from a light of the torch, and then nothing but the stars above him. He held onto his little red blanket his father had wrapped him in and watched the stars as he began to drift back into a deep hypothermic-induced sleep. This would see his body eventually turn into a shade of death and bloat, as he would inevitably diminish as he drifted deeper over the dark waters. The last thing he sees is the deep dark blackness of the sky and the North Star shining bright. Fading into what would be his last dream, he could hear the old man as if he was reading to him. "Someone I know is safe and snug and drifting off to sleep. Round and round, a little boat, no bigger than your hand, out on the ocean, far away from land. Take the little sail down, light the little light. This is the way to the garden in the night. Now you know why Iggle Piggle is the only one who's not in bed." Have you seen the ghost of skinned Tom? Bloody red bones with the skin all gone. Wouldn't it be chilly with no skin on? In rural Tennessee, there lived a young man named Tom. He was handsome, witty, charming, and athletic. What's more, Tom had an eye for the ladies, and few could resist his charms. Every girl in town eventually fell for Tom's good looks.
But he was never satisfied. As soon as he had romanced one girl, he would break up with her and move on to the next. Before long, Tom had dated almost every single girl in the area. In search of new romance, Tom moved on to new pastures and began driving to the next town over, hoping to meet some more girls. Soon, he came across a beautiful young lady named Eleanor. She had long blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a curvaceous figure. Tom was smitten with Eleanor and they began dating. There was just one problem. Eleanor was already married. But Tom didn't let that deter him. In fact, he enjoyed the excitement of sneaking around and having an affair with a married woman. The pair would often meet late at night in the local lovers' lane and make out in Tom's car. Tom and Eleanor made little effort to keep their fling a secret, and before too long, the folks in town began to gossip. Eventually, her husband got wind of what was going on and was driven insane with jealousy. He vowed to get revenge on the two of them. He told his wife he was going out of town for the weekend, then hid in the woods behind their house. As he had guessed, that evening Tom showed up to take the lady out. The husband followed them to the nearby lovers' lane. Tom and Eleanor were locked in a passionate embrace when, all of a sudden, they heard the car door open. Standing there was Eleanor's husband. His face was twisted in an evil grin, and his hand was clutching a hunting knife. Tom was scared out of his wits and began begging for his life. He swore up and down that he didn't know Eleanor was married, but the husband didn't believe him. The wronged husband grabbed Tom by the ankles and dragged him out of the car, still bearing a sadistic grin upon his angry face. "Please don't kill me," begged Tom. "Oh no," said the husband. "I'm not going to kill you. I have something far worse in mind." With that, the husband dragged Tom off into the darkness. Cowering in the car, Eleanor couldn't see what was happening, but she was forced to listen to Tom's blood-curdling screams as they pierced the dark Tennessee night. Finally, her husband emerged from the darkness, his clothes covered in blood. Without a word, he climbed into the car and drove to the local police station, where he turned himself in. The next morning, the police drove up to the crime scene and made a horrifying discovery. Hanging from the branches of a tree was a pile of human skin. They realized that the husband hadn't killed Tom. He had skinned him. In fact, the jealous man had skinned Tom so deftly and carefully that Tom was still alive at the end of the ordeal. The husband had then draped Tom's hide over a branch and left him for dead. The police searched the area, but Tom was nowhere to be seen, and they could find no trace of the hunting knife either. They say that Tom still lurks around the lovers' lane, waiting to catch a cheating couple and teach them the same lesson he learned that fateful night. Once a handsome young man, he is now just a bloody skeleton, stalking the little alleys and laneways with a big hunting knife clutched in his bony fingers. All of the teenagers in Tennessee are warned by their parents. Don't go to the lovers' lane if you don't want to be Skin Tom's next victim.
It was a cold evening in October. The leaves have started to fall from the trees like sakura petals on a beautiful Japanese spring. As I walked home from school with my favorite Deer and Grey album playing in my headphones, I passed by a yard sale and decided to take a look. I wasn't looking for anything special, but was pleasantly surprised to find a box of some old PlayStation 2 games. There were about 20 games there, but one of them caught my attention. It was a black CD case with nothing on it except a small note that read, "Final Fantasy X Ultimate Sin Edition. I hadn't played Final Fantasy X in years, and my old copy had been stolen by the jocks at my school. And even though this one had no cover, I still felt like I had to experience this masterpiece once more. I never seen this Ultimate Sin Edition before, but I guess the owner didn't know anything about video games. I went up to him and asked how much he wanted for the game, but when he saw the game I wanted to buy, he just stared at it like he had seen a spooky ghost, and with a deep voice he said, "Take it, just take it and get out of here." Suddenly, I felt a cold shiver running down my spine, and there was a presence of evil in the air. I turned around and ran home as fast as I could with the game in my backpack. Days went by, and it was now the day before Halloween. My parents and my brother were staying at my grandmother's place for the whole week, but I had to stay at home so I wouldn't miss the release of the new episode of Bleach. I felt super sugoi, so I decided I wanted to play some Japanese RPGs. As I was about to pop in my copy of Disgaea 2 Cursed Memories, I noticed there already was a game in my PlayStation 2, ready to be played. It was a blank disc with no label. I took a look around the room and noticed the black CD case, the same one I got from the yard sale the other day, laying wide open on the table with no CD in it. I said to myself, "Damn it, I have to tell my brother to stop being baka and leave my games alone." Since the game was already in the console, I decided that it was a good time to play it. I booted up my PlayStation 2 and the familiar Final Fantasy X screen showed up on the television. But there was something different. I wanted to start a new game, but the new game text was faded and I couldn't select it. And weirdly enough, there was already a save on the disc, so I tried loading it. The save was from Besaid Island, but there was no music, and as I entered the first combat screen, I noticed that Titus was already down, and the only other member was Waka. I tried using Phoenix Down on him, but he wouldn't get up. I suspected that this was some kind of glitch, but I kept playing. I finished the fight with Waka, but there was no victory music either. The only thing I could hear was what sounded like Yuna crying in the distance. Back on the field, I tried using a Phoenix Down on Titus from the menu, but just as I gave him the Phoenix Down, there was a blackout in the house, and the screen went black. I went down to the basement and flipped the switch to the fuse box, and when I came back, the TV was already on, and the game was still going. And now, the Besaid Island music had started playing, but it was playing backwards. I could hear Yuna's crying very clearly now.
These videos are creepy and weird, and I honestly am terrified.
Different about his animation. That's when I saw he was running around with no head. I couldn't enter any fights, and the music just kept getting louder and louder. And then the game crashed on me. When I started it up again, Titus' decapitated head showed up on the screen, staring at me with bleeding Sharingan eyes.
After my last experience, my parents reminded me of another story from my childhood. When you're 5, your mind lacks the experience to make informed judgments or connect things which aren't obvious. Over the years, the details get fuzzy and forgotten. Speaking with my parents the other day, they cleared the cobwebs bearing this story. I remember now much too clearly the story of Gurgles and Bugman. I had just started kindergarten that year. Everyone's a friend when you're 5, so I had no shortage of classmates. But coming from a poor family, I didn't get to see much of them outside of school. My parents spent all their waking hours trying to make ends meet and didn't have time to ferry me from house to house. So I spent my early years mostly keeping to myself, playing with the random assortment of knickknacks from the shelf in my room. Being short of money gave my family a habit of hoarding, so they hated to throw anything out. One particular item on the shelf was a small, old-fashioned TV set. A wooden veneer box about 2 feet wide by a foot tall. It had a curved glass screen that took up half the front panel. Beside the screen was a large chrome dial used to switch channels. At the top sat an antenna, formed by 2 terribly twisted wires. When my boredom made me turn it on, I'd usually just get static and snow on that glowing black and white screen. I'd twist the heavy clicking dial, hoping to pick up some local broadcasts. Mostly it would be some ghostly images and incoherent sound fragments. But one channel was always crystal clear. It was the Gurgles and Bugman show. Gurgles was a clown, but not a common one. He wore a thin black suit that draped his tall, skinny body with a matching tie, and oversized novelty clown shoes to complete his distinctive outfit. His pupils were completely black, like polished ebony marbles, with no trace of white around them. Black face paint around those eyes, and across his cheeks and mouth, made him look like a manic, grinning skeleton. It was only the crazy crop of curly hair sprouting off the sides of his head that gave him a more human look. As much as Gurgles freaked me out, Bugman scared me more. He was short and round, like a hunchback dwarf with a dark cape. He had prosthetics covering his eyes to make him look like a fly, and a mouth that was rotated 90 degrees and open from side to side. The show itself was like candid camera, with pranks played on unsuspecting people. It would always start with Gurgles and Bugman hidden away at someone's house. Gurgles would face the camera, staring at you, his bony finger touching his lips. When the unsuspecting star of the show came into view, a laugh track would begin to play. You would see them going about their nightly routines, oblivious to the conspiracy that Gurgles and Bugman had us involved in. We'd see them making dinner, or on the lounge watching TV with their family, or quietly doing their homework. Then watch as Gurgles and Bugman stole their pen, or moved their glass, or made things disappear behind their backs. The camera angles would change as Gurgles and Bugman shifted their hiding places from the dark corners of a room, to the cupboards, to the ceiling, or under the furniture, all the while looking back at you and winking. The closer they got, the louder and more laughter from the soundtrack. Eventually, when everyone went to sleep, a victim would be chosen for their prank. Waiting in the closet or under the bed, once their victim fell asleep, Bugman would crawl out and gently climb in beside them. His jaw would open sideways, and out would come a sharp straw that he'd stick in the person's neck. This always paralyzed their victim, because sometimes you could see them struggle if they woke, and saw Gurgles and Bugman on top of them. The laugh track would then be extra loud, and uproarious those few times the victims awoke. Gurgles would make faces at the camera while the audience laughed, and Bugman would use his straw to drink from the person's neck. When the victim stopped struggling after a few minutes, the laughter would turn to claps and cheering. With Bugman finished, Gurgle's face would fill the whole screen with his impossibly wide, sharp-toothed grin. Then he'd whisper, "See you again soon." The way those all-black eyes pierced through the screen always gave me the chills. I hated the show, but would be always too afraid to go near the TV while it was running. One day the TV mysteriously disappeared from my room. My parents told my 5-year-old self that they sold it to pay some bills. I accepted that without question. I was kinda glad it was gone. But yesterday when I asked them about that TV again, they exchanged nervous glances, then filled in some missing gaps from my childhood. Halfway through that year, Derek, a classmate I didn't know very well, had died in a horrific circumstance. He was murdered in his bed with a stab wound to the neck. No evidence of a break-in was ever found, so his distraught parents were taken into custody as the primary suspects. They denied all the allegations.
Well, that'll do for now.